Hello and welcome to my very first podcast. It feels really surreal to be here doing it, even though you won't have seen anything, but it's been a long time coming, actually all the way back to 2018, which I'll talk about today. My name is Jamie Sharp. This podcast is called Where Creatives Connect. And in this very first podcast, I'm going to be explaining what it's all about, who you're likely to see on it over season 1, definitely. Might talk about season 2, I'll see. And also I'm going to talk about my journey and process from back in 2018 when I kind of gave it a bit of a go, didn't really know what it should look like, through to today, 2023, February, nearly my birthday. I'm nearly 29 years old. That's quite scary. And everything in between. Where Creatives Connect is a chance, an opportunity for me to sit down with creative folk from all walks of life. I have in the pipeline musicians, actors, directors of film and TV, producers, poets, dancers, sculptors, literally everything you can think of that might be classed as a creative career or job. I will have them on the podcast, and it will be my job as a new interviewer to coax out the behind the scenes of what they get up to. So it might be their creative process, it might be the journey that they've taken from being a young whippersnapper. I never say that. Why am I saying that on a podcast? Whatever. A young person through to maybe they're still a young person, but their journey so far. And anything behind the scenes that I think can bring you value. This podcast is not just for people who class themselves as a creative, but people that like to know the process or the behind the scenes of what goes on. Or maybe you're just looking for some tips and tricks to implement into your life. You might be working in education or the NHS or have your own business. But hopefully by exploring all of these different worlds and really amazing, honest, cool, creative people, you might be able to bring some golden goodies into your own life. So that's the crux of it all. Interspersed in between these interviews are going to be some solo podcasts, very much like it is right now, me in a room, talking to a camera and a microphone, waiting for cars to drive past so I don't get interrupted audio. And it's a chance for me to explore and hopefully bring some value to you of things that I'm either learning, maybe it's something I've learned from somebody that's been on the podcast, or epiphanies I've had within my teaching or my writing or my mixing, or hopefully I'll be able to bring some value to you, something that you might be able to use in your own life. I'll give you an example. Recently in my teaching, and I've been teaching, I suppose I started teaching the saxophone about 10 years ago. It's to do with the phrase, give a person a fish and they'll eat well that day. Teach a person how to fish and they'll never go hungry again. Oh, I think I'm wobbling my camera. If you're watching this, I'm sorry. I had a really visceral experience of this teaching a young person about scales. Do you know what? I won't go into it now, but it was to do with that. And I will be explaining my experience, and then I'll try and squash it down into something that you can take away and hopefully maybe implement into your life. And like I said before, you don't have to be a saxophonist or a musician of any kind. It might be something that you're implementing into how you teach your clients in the business world. I don't know. The third and final part of this project has absolutely nothing to do with podcasts. Further down the pipeline, I'm really excited to have a body of eclectic creatives from everything I've said before, musicians through to stage managers and everything in between, and get them all in one room or on a Zoom and get them to work together. Some of my most treasured and valued work over the last 5 years has been collaborations between unexpected art forms, maybe not that unexpected anymore, but new to me at the time. So poetry and music, writing music for picture and film, and having those conversations with people that aren't technically musically minded, so they don't speak technical music stuff to you. They speak like a human being, and those collaborations are just magical. So further down the line, there will be a project involving hopefully everybody within a season or 2 seasons of the podcast collaborating on, well, you'll see. So that's the crux of what this podcast and project is all about. This middle segment of my podcast is going to be me explaining what the process has been from way back in 2018 through to today, what you're watching, and how I've arrived at coming up with this idea of what I'm doing. Let me take you back to early 2018. Hello, I hope you're really enjoying the podcast so far. If you are a human that needs to write things down in your life, if you are a human that likes nice smelling notebooks, if you are a human that likes sustainable goods in your life, then this might be for you. I am super duper lucky to be associated with DINGBATS notebooks. I'm holding up to the camera if you're listening, by the way. And this is one of their products. I use this notebook actually as a guest book for my podcast. And I take Polaroids of my guests and they can write in it, and they also forward a question to the next guest, which is a nice way to connect them all together, which is also an idea I've stolen directly from Stephen Bartlett and his podcast, The Diary of a CEO. But anyway, enough about him. These are amazing notebooks and they feel really nice and they're super durable. You can throw them in your bag. If you like them and you want one, you can get 10% off with the discount code JAMIE10, which is JAMIE10. They do lovely pens, they do lovely notebooks, they do lovely colours as well. Anyway, if you like these and you want 10% off, JAMIE10 at checkout, DINGBATS notebooks. I'll leave a link in the description. On with the podcast. Let me take you back to early 2018. I had one big goal in my life, and that big goal in my life was to create something, I didn't know what it was, that was helping me to be one version of myself. My energy was spread very, very thinly across a lot of different outgoings. For example, in a typical week, I performed the saxophone and piano, everything from contemporary classical music through to playing sax and DJ at Tiger. I was a full-time head of music at Knutsford Academy, writing music for different projects, part of a couple of different theatre companies, one of which, I live in Manchester, but one of which was in London, which I was very excited to be part of, but it was pretty difficult to keep up those two hats. I was still keeping my New Zealand thing going, where I'm able to go over and be a tutor at the National Youth Drama School of New Zealand, which is amazing. I'd just come off the back of running a venue at the Edinburgh Fringe, which was more than just running a venue. It was producing a number of different groups, nearly 15 different groups, to come together and perform within a venue. There was a whole lot of things going on. And every single different avenue I was doing, I felt that I was a completely different person. My teaching persona to my performing persona, it just felt like my energy was just being sapped or zapped. I don't know. I guess you could use both words. It was just going out, and I wanted to be able to tie it all together so that people just got who I was and what I was doing, I suppose. The way I wanted to do it was through vlogging on YouTube, and I'd seen a bunch of people doing this that had maybe created their own business or created their own platform, and I thought it might be a nice way of explaining and showing what it is that I do. So I created about 10 episodes. I put out about 4 or 5. The rest are still sat on probably a USB stick somewhere. It came to a very abrupt halt for 2 reasons. One was I burnt out hard, and 2 was I was struggling with feedback that wasn't particularly pleasant from actually people that I can think of one person that I was working with at the time. Talking about burnout for a sec, I won't go deep into it. I think burnout is a big conversation that's probably one for a future podcast. But if you imagine I was finishing work in Knutsford, getting on the train, going to London to rehearse from about 5 p.m. till 10 p.m, getting the train home. And if I missed that train, I was on the sleeper train all night to then wake up the next day and do the same thing over and over again. I was burning out hard, and it all came to a crashing halt when I had done that on a Saturday morning. I think I'd been doing this for about 5 weeks now at this point, and I also didn't tell that many people because it's a bit of a ridiculous concept, having a full-time job and then going to it was the Lyric Hammersmith Theatre. I was doing a project there, and it sounds ridiculous. I'm not even sure I told my family I was doing that half the time. But yeah, the burnout happened gradually, but it hit me hard. I woke up on Saturday morning, 5 a.m. train to London, rehearsed 9 till 2-ish, got the train up north, got to Manchester Piccadilly, went across town, picked up my car, drove to my gig in, I think it was just north of Worcester. And then I got back about 3 a.m. and I collapsed. Spent a little minute in hospital, and that was a big indication to slow some things down. I never finished that project at the Lyric Hammersmith, which still hurts to today, but there we go. This vlogging project was something that I just went, no, leave it for now. And then the other thing was I got a bunch of lovely feedback, people complimenting the idea, excited about who I was maybe interviewing or working with. But there was, I'm not going to name this person, but it was somebody I was working with at the time. It was a teacher, actually. And she was not in the arts. She didn't teach music or drama or dance or anything like that, which is cool. But for a very intelligent person, she was emotionally very lacking in intelligence. And the amount of times I walked in on her slating what I was doing, and not just to adults, even to students that I then had to teach, it was really, really painful to hear. And I think upon reflection now, being a few years older, it's probably a lack of understanding of what I was doing. But what I was really doing is trying to discover who I was creatively. I was trying to find a platform and an outlet for me to just explain who I was and explore who I was. And again, I think if it was, and I'm not comparing it to this, I'm just exploring another scenario. If it was me exploring myself in a different way, if I was exploring my sexuality or my gender or my identity in any kind, I definitely don't think that same person would have been so harsh and so mean and so unpleasant about the situation. But I really struggled, and that's part of the process of lots of things, taking feedback, but I didn't want that to be part of my life, so I stopped it. Again, upon reflection, I had probably 100 nice comments for her, one nasty, and it wasn't one nasty, it was repeated nasty, but you get the vibe. So anyway, I put that to bed, and I didn't really think about it for, I don't know, 5 years or so. Fast forward to the summer of 2022, and everything's back open. COVID feels like a long distance sour memory. I was doing a lot of traveling in my car. A typical midweek day, I was doing a bunch of gigs at the weekend, which were great, but my middle of the week was chaotic. I would wake up in Manchester, drive 35 minutes south to Sandbach to teach. I'd be there from 8 a.m. to just after 1. I'd then get back in my car, drive to Liverpool, teach on behalf of SAFA, the contemporary music group. They were facilitating the New York Philharmonic Orchestra's Very Young Composer Scheme, and I was working with a bunch of year 4 or 5s, amazing young minds, teaching them how to compose for a variety of different instruments. Myself on soprano saxophone, Tim Williams on a variety of different percussion instruments, and Jennifer Langridge on cello. There were some graphic scores, there was some written notation, there was all sorts of things, and it was an amazing project. And then I would get back in my car after that in Liverpool, drive to either Sandbach again to run some ensembles. By the way, that's like an hour's drive as well. Like the Love Music Trust Junior Big Band, Senior Big Band, Saxophone Orchestra, Lions Youth Brass debut band, or sometimes go to Wilmslow to Depp for my friend Josh Savage, who will be on the podcast in the near future. He was running one of the big bands he does, which is Fish Lip Soup Big Band. Ultimately then getting to Tesco at about 10:30, picking up food for the first time of the day, sitting on my sofa and planning the whole next day. So you can see there were chaotic days, but I was spending a lot of time in the car listening to podcasts, everything from Joe Rogan to Mind Pump to Don't Be Sour by Max Tuning to Susie Collier's podcast to just like so many variety of podcasts. And I suppose in the back of my mind, I was generating some sort of idea, but I genuinely was not consciously thinking about it. Now, this bit, if you're still listening, this bit sounds a bit wishy-washy, but I promise this is exactly how it happened. Driving to Liverpool, I was heavily caffeinating myself to make sure that I was on top form. And I paused whatever podcast I was listening to. And out of nowhere, and I know it sounds a bit hippie, but this is exactly how it went down. I literally spoke into existence, spoke this plan of what this podcast will be in its 3 forms: interviews, solo podcasts, editing, doing on video as well. By the way, if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I am videoing these, particularly the ones that are interviews I've got 3 cameras. I saved up a bunch of money. I've got 3 cameras, so I'm editing it all together so I can put visual cues in as well. So yeah, watch it on YouTube if you're not as well. Yeah, I spoke into existence the whole plan of it, and the collaboration side of it as well. How it will look, how it will sound, and it ticked so many boxes in my mind. I love editing. I love having these conversations. I love collaborating. I love writing music for a purpose. Like, if I have music on here, most of the time I will have written it, or I'll have written it with a friend of mine. The track that goes at the end is one that I wrote with a really good friend of mine, Stan Scott. We were jamming out at his one day, recording a bunch of things, and it was like, oh, this is the one for the end of the podcast. It just felt right. It was reflective enough, but with a glimmer of hope as well for hopefully the next podcast. So I spoke into existence, and then across the next 7-8 months, I saved up money. I've redone this space so I can film in it. It's hyper functional. I've got different lights, I've got different cameras, different microphones. It's all safe and warm and acoustically treated. I did all that and got a bunch of people to give me advice. Some people that are on YouTube, some people that have done podcasts in their past or currently doing it. And I just absorbed any bits of help that they could give me. And here we are. Yeah, that's the story. Gave it a go in 2018. Wasn't the right time for it. Left it to simmer in the back of my mind. And that wasn't a plan. I just closed that door. But I guess things bubble away, don't they? Summer of 2022, it felt just so... The way I describe it, and I have not been able to speak about this for many things in my life, it just felt so clear in my mind that this podcast and the way I could bring people to me rather than me expending my energy out all the time, it just feels like exactly how I should be spending my time and my energy as I approach the grand old age of 29. So that's that. That's how it came to be, as far as I can remember anyway. So, final chunk of this podcast. What can you expect to see, and when can you expect to see it? They're going to be out weekly. I'm sure I've said something different on a previous YouTube video, but whatever. The plan for now is that they are out on Mondays. I'm going to say let's have a nice little window between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. so you can drive home on a Monday, listen to it. Maybe you want to watch it that night. I don't know, whatever. They're going to be out on Mondays, weekly. And if I do a solo podcast, I think they'll also be out on Mondays as well. I think I might have said Fridays in the past. Yeah, no, let's scrap that. Mondays, weekly, that would be great. The first series is in this studio right here. All I'll say about the second series is that it won't just not be in the studio. It won't necessarily be in this country. ... How exciting. I'm so excited to sit down with these amazing creatives and learn from them. I hope my goal is achieved and that I can bring you value from them. I've been listening to Tim Ferriss a lot. He's an amazing interviewer, and I'm going to try and carve their conversation out to be cohesive somewhat. Not always, but somewhat cohesive. And also pick out the parts that are going to be really useful for you at home. And then, depending on what I feel is right, I'll reflect in solo podcasts, and yeah, there we are. If you're still listening, thank you very, very much. Please do be part of this community by liking and subscribing and following and whatever else you do, but also get in touch. Tell me what it is that has brought you value, because it's going to be different for everybody, but it's really interesting for me to see what actually is valuable to you, the listener at home. It's good learning for me, but it also helps me carve out future podcasts so that I'm able to make them valuable to you and cohesive. And it's not just for me, this whole venture. I am trying to bring value. Like I said, I've been teaching saxophone. Well, I've been teaching music for 10 years, but I love it. I do love teaching. I love the act of teaching. And I'm just excited to use this as a medium to be able to teach in a different way, because I think I've learned the most in my life when I've not been as a active pupil, but I've had to communicate the thing that I already know, or I thought I already knew to somebody else. And that's when you really deeply learn it, not just surface level learn. So yeah, I'm super excited. Thank you for listening. Wherever you are in the world and whatever you are doing, remember to create with people, connect with people, but most importantly, be exactly you. Until the next time, peace. Oh, I need to say, if you happen to be listening to this on the day that it is brought out, which is Friday the something of February, I'm not going to be leaving you for very long in the dark. My first interview with the amazing composer, musician, and creative mind Andy Scott is going to be out this Monday coming. So you've just got one weekend to sit tight and get excited. See you on Monday. Peace.